Here's a question for you. If one of your machines that you own became sentient, which would you want it to be and why?
We interrupt our program with a special bulletin. An unidentified object has been spotted in orbit around the Earth.
Hey everyone, welcome to Book Invasion. I am your host Scott, and today we have a special treat. We're doing a buddy review of Battlestar Suburbia by Chris McCrudden, starring myself and the one and only D.G. Wiggins on books.
Hey BookTube, D.G. Wiggins from D.G. Wiggins on Books, here with Daisy to do a collab video with Steve from Book Invasion. We did a buddy read of Battlestar Suburbia by Chris McCrudden. This is the first time that I've done a collab video with anybody, but I managed to convince Scott to follow my format for book reviews, and that means that he will be doing certain portions and I will be doing certain portions, each within our own style. For this video, I will be covering the characters, the writing style, the climax, and the likes and dislikes. If he hasn't covered it already in his part of the video, there will be spoilers.
In space, no one can hear you clean.
Engage. Plot summary.
Let me read you the plot summary so you have an idea of what the F this book is about. When Darren's charge cart gets knocked off the Earth to Mars highway and lost in space forever, he thinks his day can't get any worse. When Kelly sees Darren accidentally short-circuit a talking lamppost, and its camera captures her face as it expires, she thinks her day can't get any worse. When Panasonic Tefl, a sentient bread maker, is sent on a top-secret mission into the depths of the internet and betrayed by her boss, a power-crazed smartphone, she knows this is only the beginning of a day that isn't going to get any better. Join Darren, Kelly, and Pam in an anarchic comic adventure that takes them from the shining skyscrapers of Singulopolis to the sewers of the Battlestar Discovery and find out what happens when a person puts down their mop and bucket and says no. Battlestar Suburbia will be loved by fans of Douglas Adams, Terry Pratchett, and Jasper Fforde, as well as anyone who's ever wondered just how long someone can stay under one of those old-fashioned hair dryers. Footnotes, the answer is a really very, very long time. Now there's a lot to unpack in that little plot summary. We are talking about a charge cart and an Earth to Mars highway. We're talking about short-circuiting a lamppost that captures Kelly's face. We're talking about a sentient bread maker who is going into the internet with her evil-spirited boss, a sentient smartphone. It's all just bonkers. So the hook with this book is machines have all gained their own sentience and have enslaved humans. And all the machines rule Earth. All the humans kind of live in the Battlestar Discovery ship that's kind of orbiting above the Earth's atmosphere. And the humans live, it's described as kind of like a shanty town and sewers and things like that. Not really very clean or crisp. And the humans take a shuttle from that down to Earth to become the janitors and cleaners and do the bidding of these machines. And in this world, unproductivity is a crime. You have to have a job when you're there, or else they'll call the authorities and put you in jail. And disobedience is taboo. No one goes onto the internet anymore, and the machines don't go on the internet because it's too. The memes have kind of taken over the internet. There's actually a pretty funny quote about that. Let me read that to you. Elsewhere on the internet, history had been retouched, re-edited, deleted, so that no suggestion that biological entities had once controlled the place remained. And here's another one. On the internet, however, World of Warcraft avatars merged with Reddit trolls to spawn a line of programs so fanatical about defending the purity of their message boards that they made a terrorist cell look like a basket full of sleeping kittens.
Now to D.G. Wiggins for the characters.
The characters in this book are made up of mainly three primary characters with a lot of secondary characters. However, the secondary characters, or side characters, are pretty important. You spend a lot of time with them, and they each have their own individual arcs, so I'll mention a few of them as well. But among the three primary characters, we have Pam, Kelly, and Darren. Pam is by far my favorite character in this book. She is a sentient bread maker / social worker. Or at least she starts out that way. She's a mother and a wife among machines, that is. And she is one of the main characters in this book. Her story, however, takes her from being very passive and very peace-loving to going postal. She kills a lot of machine characters, a lot of bad guys. She starts a lot of trouble. She goes through several transformations throughout the book. This book could have been entirely about Pam had it been architected a little bit differently, but rather instead it's sort of an amalgamation of Pam's adventures interacting with Darren and Kelly. Darren is let's say the only male human character in this book, and he's made out to be a fairly weak main character. We start off with him from the very first chapter. That's why I say he's a main character. But we don't really see a whole lot of development with him. He seems to be fairly weak in terms of talents, in terms of intelligence. His main strength or ability, though, is that he has sort of this innate knack that he discovers to build disguises. And most of those disguises involve him dressing up as women, or some variation of that. There is some comic relief to that, but he is sort of drug along for the ride. He is one of those main characters who is pulled, kicking and screaming throughout the story. By the end, we do see him become more of a hero during the climax of the story, but most of the time he is sort of drug along as baggage. Kelly, also meant to be one of the main characters, ultimately is sort of the strong, smart female love interest for Darren. She has an innate ability to engineer things. She at one point gives Pam an entirely new body from scratch, which is super cool. She is sort of the, for lack of a better word, sex appeal throughout the entire book. But again, she kind of gets pulled into a number of directions that don't lead her to develop a whole lot, which we'll talk about again in the climax. I mentioned there is a bunch of secondary or side characters in this book that actually do have character arcs. So I'm going to throw out Janice, which is Kelly's mother, and the cyborg ladies, who have been around for ages. They are part human, part machine, and each of them play a serious role in this book. You actually spend quite a bit of time with those characters. Yet when you look up this book and look up like a synopsis, they're rarely mentioned. If you don't like them, you will find that will have a detrimental effect on the book. So I think it's important to consider when you're looking at it.
Now back to Scott for the setting.
So of course the setting for this book is in the far future. It takes place kind of on this Dole Star Discovery, as well as on Earth, where the machines are ruled. The Dole Star is described kind of as a shanty town for the humans to live. They don't make much money, of course. They're doing all the bidding of the machines. Where in this world, machines get cleaned by humans. They still crave that human touch and that human interaction, but it's so taboo that these cleaners have to work in the dark, seedy alleys. And they have things called fondle parlors where the machines can go in and get the greasy human fingers touched on them, and they love it. So Kelly sees Darren in trouble. Kelly goes over and kind of just intervenes and says, "Hey, when was the last time you got clean, Mr. Street Lamp?" And then she reaches into its circuits boards, and then Darren accidentally short circuits the thing, which again is considered a murderous offense for these government-run street lamps, and now that kind of triggers their whole fugitive on the run movement. And so yeah, this book is very kind of gimmicky. It's kind of light and airy and humorous, but there's still kind of good action sequences.
Tell us about the writing style, DG.
With regards to the writing style of the book, this is comedic sci-fi. However, it's not funny in a more refined sort of way. It's more like, let's throw a million jokes at you and see which ones stick. More often than not, you'll find yourself grinning, but you do have to go through quite a few that are kind of meh. Many readers will feel like this writing style is similar to that of Douglas Adams, or they'll see parallels between the two authors. For those of you who are not familiar with Douglas Adams, that means that there will be some degree of suspension of disbelief required from you, the reader. That said, if you can go along for the ride, I think you'll find yourself grinning along the way quite a bit. There's a lot of parallels, social parallels between the real world and what is depicted in the story, even if things don't actually match up logically all the time.
Pacing.
The pacing of this book is really well paced. It kind of goes from one thing to another. Darren kind of fumbles around and gets himself into trouble. Kelly is kind of the heroine of the thing, where she saves Darren and gets him out of these sticky situations. Pam is then also on her own little quest, and eventually they kind of merge into one. But it's really good paced. It keeps you entertained if you can get through all the puns and all the silliness. It kind of moves pretty fast, and it's a pretty good pacing. I found it kept my attention throughout.
I'll have what she's having.
If you haven't been warned yet, spoiler alert, the climax of this book ends up playing itself out on several different fronts. And you get this because you actually have multiple main point of view characters. With Darren, we have him in the company of a doggish pet drone lockpick, riding an emotionally confused adolescent nuclear rocket, targeting his home. Janice is leading a rebellion of humans against machines called Freedom for Fleshies. Pam has managed to split herself into multiple copies of her consciousness and is fighting off everything. That's the best way of putting it. She fights internet memes, swarms of nanobots, nefarious cell phones trying to take over the government. Everything. She's everywhere. And lastly, we have Kelly, who has sort of fallen into this damsel in distress sort of role. Her body's been taken over by basically a villain, and she's just sort of absent yet present. She could have a much bigger role. I would expect her, let's say, to have a much bigger role in future books. But at least during the climax of this book, she was just sort of there but trapped and not really doing much. We don't get a lot with Kelly, which is kind of awkward, seeing as she was so present during the rest of the book, and she's related to all these characters in one way or another, either by blood or as a friend or a love interest. Overall, the climax does have you jumping between heads quite a bit. Like a good climax, it is the sort of thing that you do not want to put down mid-read. Dedicate some time to make it through the climax in one sitting.
Viva the resolution.
The resolution kind of comes after a snowball effect of Darren and Kelly's antics, and then Pam's transition from the homely bread maker to this badass rich bitch persona of her her parts being melded with like a motorcycle, and she just turns into like a badass. So the resolution, I think, wasn't as strong as I had felt. There were still some pieces that were missing. There were still some characters that were kind of left out of the resolution, so it was satisfying to an extent, but I think that there could have been more with some of the other characters.
What did you like or dislike?
Finally, my major likes and dislikes of this book. My major like is, if you haven't gotten it already, Pam. Pam is my favorite character. I love her character arc, going from the more submissive, passive social worker / mother to becoming a bullet-dodging, rich bitch motorcycle gone postal through the metropolis. And then finally making that ultimate leap to this semi-omniscient internet hacker / terrorist, fighting on the behalf of the underdogs, being the humans in this case. Her physical transformations throughout the book really kind of help support that, going from bread maker to motorcycle to bodiless. It really makes that character arc sort of obvious, and yet gives it a lot of fresh feeling every time she changes. You know, it's a new look, a new body, something new to work with within the story. My major dislike for this book was an overall feeling of confusion. And for this, I'm going to quote Alexis from a review on Goodreads. And I'm just going to quote what she wrote, because I agree with it wholeheartedly. The main negative for me was the machines themselves. I just found it hard to work out that what they were meant to be like, which made the whole thing impossible to imagine. I mean, they were meant to be life-size, so I just don't understand how they would interact with each other as it says in the book, because most of the machines, like the smartphones, the tasers, the little handheld instruments, are all too small compared to larger machines. When I was trying to imagine it, they were just sort of giant versions of themselves. But that was never made clear in the book. I also struggled to work out if they had real faces and what they were meant to look like, what their arms and legs were meant to be like, and if they had any in the first place. And just generally, it seemed a bit vague in terms of description. I just couldn't see what the author obviously saw. Maybe it was just me, but the whole thing was half-formed in my mind, and so it was hard for me to get on board with it. Alexis, I couldn't agree more. I did feel like the descriptions were lacking. Not that there were no descriptions, there were, but in a world that was so different, with machines that had arms and legs, sometimes faces, it was hard to tell. It was hard to imagine this world because it was so different from ourselves, and I feel like the author kind of leaned on the fact that these characters, the machines, were based off of household appliances that we interacted with all the time, so we should be able to understand that, right? Well, no, not so much. Not when these household appliances are talking to each other, interacting with each other. You kind of have this little toaster adventure going on, and yet the size difference between things wasn't accommodated for. And then there was some points where you've got household instruments that suddenly grow appendages. It almost felt like a bit of Deus Ex Machina in those minutes.
So my likes and dislikes. I really like the creativity of the world. It was more like the brave little toaster meets iRobots kind of thing, with humanity as their slaves. I thought that was an interesting premise. I thought it was pretty funny. The trouble I've had, of course, was imagining these robots, these machines being sentient. Like, do they have arms and legs? Are they tall? Are they short? Had they changed their modifications, or is it like a bread maker really fighting a smartphone that's only yay big, or is something like that? It was hard to distinguish the proportions of these beings when they're describing fight scenes. So that was a little troublesome, but all in all, it was kind of funny and humorous. So that was Battlestar Suburbia. I hope you liked our dueling reviews, our buddy review, and check out the book. It's pretty entertaining, and thanks for watching. We will see you next time.